They called her a loser before she'd even finished roll call. What they didn't know was that she trained in tactical combat for over a decade, and what happened next would leave the entire classroom speechless. When Miss Elena Cruz walked into Oak Ridge Technical High on her first day as a substitute history teacher, she expected some resistance. But she wasn't prepared for the wall of open hostility that greeted her, especially from a group of senior boys seated in the back row who acted like they ran the school. At just 5'3", Elena looked like an easy target, soft-spoken, youthful, and dressed in a plain blouse and slacks. What no one knew was that before becoming a teacher, Elena had spent 8 years as a military close-quarters trainer and had only recently returned to civilian life to follow her true passion for education. She'd survived deployment zones, but nothing quite like the psychological games teenagers played to assert dominance. As she began calling out names for attendance, the tension thickened. A loud voice interrupted. "Is this your side hustle or your punishment?" Laughter followed. One student stood up theatrically, mock saluted her, and shouted, "Loser reporting for duty." The room erupted, except for the few students who shifted uncomfortably, clearly used to this routine of humiliation. Elena set down her clipboard. Her heart didn't race, her breath didn't quicken. Her training had taught her how to assess threats, stay composed, and act with purpose. In the space between that insult and the next burst of laughter, she made a decision. What happened next would change the way that classroom, and eventually the entire school, understood power, respect, and what it means to cross the wrong woman on the wrong day. Oak Ridge Technical High had a reputation, not for academics, but for being the kind of school where new teachers didn't last. Nestled in the industrial edge of Greenville, it was a place where worn-out textbooks, scuffed lockers, and a revolving door of faculty had become the norm. Elena Cruz had taken the job thinking it would be temporary, just a 3-month contract to cover a teacher on medical leave. But as soon as she stepped into room 104, it was clear she'd walked into a pressure cooker. The school's star athletes, especially Logan Merrick, a 6'2" senior linebacker with more disciplinary warnings than credits, held court at the back of the class. His father owned the largest construction company in town, and Logan knew how to use that privilege like a weapon. He didn't just push boundaries, he erased them. Alongside him were his two shadows, Chase and Hunter, the type who laughed a little too loudly and backed Logan without question. Most students either stayed quiet or copied their behavior to avoid becoming targets. Elena had dealt with louder men, more dangerous men, but never ones protected by a system of indifference. She dressed modestly, kept her hair tied back, and avoided heels. Classic behavioral camouflage. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to teach history, but by the third insult before roll call even ended, she understood this was going to be something else. "Miss Cruz," Logan had sneered, his eyes full of that gleam bullies got when they sensed weakness. "Is it true you used to teach toddlers? Because that'd make more sense for your size." The laughter that followed was cruel and coordinated. Elena smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. This was the same laugh she'd heard during military drills, from soldiers who thought she didn't belong. And just like then, she didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she slowly walked to the front of the room, placed the attendance sheet down, and said, "Let's try something different." Before anyone could react, she moved. One fluid step, and she had closed the space between herself and Logan. In one impossibly fast motion, she redirected his outstretched arm. He had been gesturing mockingly, and turned it into a textbook takedown. Not violent, just sudden, smooth, and impossible to ignore. Logan found himself flat on his back, blinking at the ceiling. The room went dead silent, and in that silence, something shifted. No one moved, no one breathed. Even Logan looked stunned, not from pain, but from the sheer shock of what had just happened. Elena hadn't hurt him. She'd used his own momentum, redirected with surgical precision, and left him on the floor in front of the very people he thrived on impressing. It wasn't violence, it was control. Elena stepped back calmly, not gloating, not smirking, just looking down at Logan like a professional assessing her work. "Are we ready to begin roll call now?" she asked, her tone level. A few students choked back nervous laughter, not at her, but at the absurdity of the moment. Logan scrambled to his feet, cheeks burning, his confidence shaken to the core. Chase and Hunter looked at each other, clearly unsure if they should double down or back off. Elena turned her back on them and resumed the roll call as if nothing had happened. That move, a calculated dismissal, spoke louder than any speech she could have given. And it worked. For the rest of that class, no one dared interrupt her. Some students even started paying attention, especially the quieter ones who had clearly been used to keeping their heads down. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire through the school. Did you hear what happened in room 104? She flipped Logan Merrick, didn't even touch him hard. Students from other classes began lingering near the doorway during her lessons. The whispers grew into respect, and respect became curiosity. But Logan wasn't finished. Humiliation had turned to resentment, and now he was looking for a way to get even. Elena knew the look in his eyes. It wasn't over. Not yet, but she also saw something else. In the back row, a girl named Mina Thompson, usually invisible, had started raising her hand. A boy named Tyler, known for skipping class, was suddenly showing up early. Her presence was shifting something subtle in the room. Elena had been brought in to teach ancient history, but what she was building, moment by moment, confrontation by confrontation, was something far more current. A new kind of order. And she knew, deep down, that the next challenge would come soon, and it would be worse. By the start of the second week, the power dynamic inside room 104 had clearly changed, but not without resistance. Logan had stopped making jokes, but his silence was thick with strategy. He wasn't done. No bully gives up the crown without a fight. Instead of open mockery, he shifted to subtler games, tapping his pen incessantly while Elena spoke, whispering behind his hand during instructions, rolling his eyes when she called on other students. But Elena had seen this tactic before. It was textbook psychological warfare. Death by 1,000 cuts, and like every battle she'd fought in uniform, she treated this one with precision. She never took the bait. She acknowledged Logan's presence without giving him power, redirecting the class's focus with calm energy and moments of unexpected humor. Meanwhile, the students who had once looked down at their desks had started looking up. Mina Thompson's sketches now lined the back bulletin board, encouraged by Elena after she noticed her sketching in the margins of her notes. Tyler had asked for help building a timeline project and stayed after class twice just to get it right. Even a few students from Logan's circle began drifting away from him, intrigued by the strange, quiet authority that had taken over the room. But the tension still simmered beneath the surface. Elena could feel it every time she passed Logan in the hallway and saw him flanked by his new allies from the football team, boys who weren't even in her class but made a point of laughing a little too loudly when she walked by. That Friday, she found her classroom door glued shut with epoxy. She waited patiently for the janitor, took pictures for documentation, and calmly taught her lesson from the hallway using a whiteboard she rolled over from the math department. Her students, those who had once been passive, moved their desks without being asked. "Losers don't adapt," she said that day, "but leaders do." The kids clapped. Not because she asked for it, but because they knew she meant every word. But deep down, Elena also knew something else. These tactics weren't the end. They were the build-up. Logan was planning something bigger, something designed to break her completely. And when it came, she would be ready. It happened the following Tuesday during third period. The class was preparing to present their group projects on historical revolutions, an assignment Elena had designed to spark discussion about power, control, and resistance. Ironically, it was the perfect backdrop for what Logan had planned. He stood up confidently when it was his group's turn, clicked on the projector, and began his presentation with a smug grin. But instead of opening with the assigned slides, the screen lit up with a photoshopped image, a cartoonish caricature of Elena, surrounded by phrases like Miss Crisis and wannabe soldier. The class gasped. Some students laughed, uncertain, uncomfortable. Others looked at Elena in horror. It was meant to humiliate her, to remind everyone that no matter how respected she seemed, she was still just an outsider, a substitute, someone they could break. For a moment, the silence after the slide felt like a punch. Logan stood there, arms crossed, daring her to react. Elena stared at the screen for a full 3 seconds, then calmly walked to the front, unplugged the projector, and faced the class. "Well," she said, "that's one interpretation of revolution, a misuse of resources, an abuse of creativity, a complete failure to grasp the assignment, but still, an interpretation." Logan opened his mouth, probably to protest, but she held up her hand and continued. "We can all choose how we use our skills. Some use them to build, some to tear down, but either way we reveal who we are." The words hung in the air, heavier than any threat. "Thank you, Mr. Merrick. You've shown us exactly what fear of change looks like." The students looked from Logan to Elena, waiting for his next move. But for once, Logan had none. His smirk faded and he sat down, his jaw tight. Elena resumed class as if nothing had happened, moving on to the next group. She didn't retaliate. She didn't run. She simply re-established control, not with aggression, but with poise. And just like that, the classroom had a new narrative. Not of a teacher embarrassed, but of a woman unshaken, again. Students exchanged glances, this time not in ridicule, but in quiet admiration. And outside the classroom walls, the story began spreading again, but this time with a different kind of energy. One that made Logan realize his grip on the school was slipping. By Thursday, the entire senior hallway was buzzing. Word had spread fast. Elena Cruz had dismantled Logan Merrick's attempted takedown without lifting a finger, and she'd done it in front of his own fan base. Suddenly, it wasn't just room 104 that paid attention. Other teachers started dropping by her classroom during breaks with thinly veiled curiosity. A few offered quiet nods of respect. But while Elena's influence quietly grew, Logan's frustration was reaching a boiling point. His usual tricks, pranks, passive-aggressive notes, whisper campaigns, no longer landed. His friends were drifting, some even asking Elena for project help after class. But Logan wasn't just angry at Elena. He was angry that the old rules no longer worked. That a woman half his size and twice his restraint had taken everything he relied on, fear, control, reputation, and turned it to dust. So he changed tactics. He started recording her with his phone in class, claiming it was to protect himself from unfair treatment. He edited clips to make her sound harsh or unhinged and posted them to a private group chat with the caption, "Crisis Cruz strikes again." Elena noticed, of course, she always noticed, but instead of confronting him directly, she started documenting everything, every lesson plan, every classroom interaction, every incident. She filed quiet reports to the vice principal. She stayed late updating logs, not out of fear, but for precision, the kind of discipline you learn not in teacher training, but in combat zones. She knew what he was doing. He was escalating because he was losing. The calm before the storm was always filled with noise. Then came the graffiti. A crude message was spray-painted across her car in the staff lot. "Leave or break." It was bold, loud, a clear line drawn in permanent ink. Elena stood staring at it for a moment, then calmly took out her phone and called campus security. As the janitor scrubbed the words off the paint, Elena sat on the curb nearby, unmoving, like a soldier waiting out a sandstorm. She didn't cry, she didn't flinch. She simply said, "He's almost out of moves." And she was right. Because when people like Logan lose control, they either disappear or detonate. And Elena could feel it coming, the moment where everything would ignite. It all came to a head the following Monday. Elena walked into room 104 to find her chair missing, her whiteboard markers crushed, and a pile of torn-up student essays scattered across the floor. A message written in red ink across the board read, "She's not one of us." The class entered moments later, stunned into silence. Some froze in the doorway. Others hovered awkwardly near their desks. Logan sat in the back, arms folded, wearing a smug expression that barely masked his desperation. Elena stood at the front, looking out at the mess without blinking. "Well," she said after a long pause, "I suppose someone's afraid of words more than fists." The room held its breath. And then something unexpected happened. Mina Thompson, the quiet artist who had barely spoken her first week, stood up and began picking up the shredded essays. "This isn't who we are," she said softly. Then Tyler joined, followed by 2 more students, then 5. Within a minute, more than half the class was helping restore order, while Elena remained still, watching it all unfold like a slow but powerful shift in gravity. Logan's smirk faded. His kingdom was dissolving, and he knew it. Even Chase and Hunter looked uncertain now, hesitating instead of following his lead. "Sit down, all of you," Logan barked. "She's playing you." But no one listened. For the first time, his voice carried no weight. Elena bent down, picked up the last torn paper and said, "The thing about respect, Mr. Merrick, is that it can't be stolen, only given." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was heard by every soul in the room. And as students returned to their seats, something had changed. Not just in the classroom, but in the social structure that had once empowered Logan. The silence that followed wasn't the fearful kind. It was focused, collective, like the moment before a movement begins. Elena didn't need to fight anymore. The room had done it for her. But deep inside, she knew Logan wouldn't go quietly. There was still one confrontation left, and it would be his last attempt to reclaim the fear he had lost. The final confrontation came 3 days later, and this time there was no disguise, no prank, no subtle sabotage. It was fourth period, and Elena had just finished explaining the structure of post-war Europe when Logan stood up without warning, his chair screeching backward across the linoleum floor. "This is a joke," he announced, his voice louder and angrier than it had ever been. "I'm done pretending this circus is normal." The room tensed instantly. Elena's posture shifted, subtle but intentional, weight evenly distributed, hands relaxed but ready. "Mr. Merrick," she said calmly, "please take your seat." He didn't. Instead, he stepped forward. One step, then another. "You think you've won?" he growled. "You think just because some kids like you belong here?" His voice cracked with rage. "This is our school, not yours." His hands were clenched now, his breathing shallow. Students began backing up, pushing their desks away as instinct took over. Mina's phone was already recording. "If you take one more step," Elena said evenly, "you will regret it." Logan sneered and lunged, a reckless, clumsy attempt to shove her, to reclaim some scrap of dominance through force. But he never touched her. In a blink, Elena sidestepped, redirected his momentum with a smooth, open-hand Paxal strike to his shoulder, and pivoted into a control stance. Logan stumbled forward, off balance, and in one fluid movement, Elena turned his own force against him. He landed on one knee, his arm pinned behind his back. Not painfully, but with undeniable precision. The room was completely still, save for the sound of Logan's labored breathing and a single backpack sliding off a desk in the silence. "This isn't about strength," she said quietly, her voice carrying like steel through the air. "It's about control, and you never had any." She released him, and Logan collapsed backwards, stunned and speechless. He didn't get up. Not for several seconds. Not until the whispers had already started. Not until every student had already seen the truth. He was never in control. Elena didn't gloat. She simply turned back to the board, erased the timeline and said, "Now then, let's talk about reconstruction." And for the first time, no one, not even Logan, interrupted. By the end of the day, the story had spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire. Videos of the confrontation hit every group chat, every hallway whisper, every after-practice conversation. But what surprised everyone wasn't just that Logan had been taken down. It was how Elena had done it. No punches thrown, no shouting, just precision, control, and a kind of unshakable calm that most had never seen before. The administration called her in the next morning. She walked into the principal's office, prepared for pushback, but instead was met with an awkward silence and a printed screenshot of the video placed on the desk. "We're aware of the incident," Principal Navarro said carefully. "Normally, this would trigger a full investigation, but after reviewing the footage and hearing from students and faculty, it seems you de-escalated the situation with restraint." He paused. "Actually, many of us think you may have just changed the school." Wordlessly, he slid her a permanent contract. Elena blinked, but accepted it. When she returned to class that afternoon, Logan's seat was empty. Officially, he had transferred to a district program more suited to his behavioral needs. Unofficially, he had been removed under pressure from parents, staff, and even fellow students, tired of his reign. In his absence, the classroom felt lighter, sharper, more focused. Mina had taken a leadership role in group discussions. Tyler was mentoring younger students in the tech lab. Elena still taught history, but now her class was something more, an incubator for confidence. Students didn't just learn about the past, they were reshaping their present. And every once in a while, a new kid would try to test the boundaries, challenge her, size her up, and someone like Mina or Tyler would lean forward and say, "You might want to think twice." And they always did. 3 years later, Elena Cruz stood on stage at the State Educators Conference, delivering a keynote titled Classroom Command, Leading Through Respect, Not Fear. The auditorium was packed, teachers, administrators, even policymakers, eager to hear from the woman whose viral classroom moment had sparked district-wide reform in conflict response training. Behind her sat students-turned mentors, now in college or working in design, IT, and education, some of them alumni of Room 104. In the front row sat Mina Thompson, now a rising junior in art therapy, who had returned that day just to thank Elena again for believing in her voice. As the crowd applauded the conclusion of her talk, Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket with a message from an unknown number. It read, "You probably deleted my last one, but I had to say this. You were right. I never had control. I just wanted to feel like I mattered. I'm in counseling now, working on myself. Thank you for showing me what strength actually looks like. Logan." Elena stared at the screen for a moment, not with surprise, but with a quiet understanding. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. His message wasn't an ending, it was proof. Proof that even the most toxic roots could be pulled up when met with clarity, structure, and patience. That bullies didn't need destruction, they needed boundaries. That sometimes striking back didn't mean hitting harder, it meant standing so firm they couldn't knock you over. Back at Oak Ridge, Room 104 had become known for something new. Not fear, not control, but transformation. Every semester, students walked in sizing up the teacher and left standing taller, braver, more certain of their voice. Not because they feared her, but because she showed them what it looked like to own yourself without apology. And sometimes, that kind of strength was the loudest strike of all.